Hi, and welcome to the How to Make a Tutorial. I'm Doug.
I'm Guy.
And I'm Andrea.
Alright everyone, so jokes aside, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. Today we're going to be working on the main core aspects of what we're going to be doing inside of this series on making a game that is very close or similar to the game FORAGER. Let's begin by installing Unity. If you've already done so, you can just skip ahead in the video. Firstly, we need to go to unity.com. When we're here, we're going to click Get Started, and we can see all of the different versions of Unity. Unless you're a really experienced developer and working in a team, I suggest that we just go to the individual tab and pick one of the student or personal licenses of Unity. In this case, we're going to be choosing the personal license because it fits all of our needs. It comes with all of the base engine features. The only difference is that with the other versions, you get little extras such as Unity's splash screen customizations. Usually the only reason people or teams have to switch licenses is because they have made over $100,000 with Unity and then are required to switch. Once we click Get Started, we will see that we have two tabs in front of us, one for first-time users and one for returning users. We're going to be clicking the first-time users button. Once we do, let's click Agree and Download to agree to the terms, and now we have Unity. Once you have downloaded it, just go through the download or installation process alone and then meet back with me once you are finished. Once you have downloaded Unity, let's open Unity Hub and get started. First, we're going to the installation tab and we will install the latest version of Unity. Since I already have it installed, I'm going to use something else as a sort of tutorial purpose, but now let's go ahead and add Windows build support, and we are now done. Now that we've installed Unity successfully and got it all set up, let's head back to the projects tab and go to our new button to create a new project. We're going to be making a 2D project, and let's go ahead and name it Tutorial Game. Just to let you guys know, it's probably going to take 24 years for your project to open, but don't worry about that. It's probably going to only be for the first time. Now that we have set everything up, I'm going to be showing you guys a little bit of the things that we're going to be using and doing inside of today's video. If you at any point feel confused, feel free to ask questions, or you can rewind the video. The first thing we're going to be doing is making our little player cube move around. Before we get started with this, let's learn a few basics. When coding, we're going to need things that are called variables. In programming, variables are names that are used to hold one or more values. The variable types that we are going to be using in this episode are floats and a vector 2. Let's go ahead and explain what the different variable types are in programming. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'm just going to get the basics down. Let's get started with some numbers. You will see three different types of numbers a lot in programming. Integers, which are a whole number of variables, so they have no decimal values. Floats, which are numbers that have a decimal value. And doubles, which are very similar to floats, but have a much more precise number. Now, let's dig a little deeper. In programming, we use functions. Functions are blocks of code that you can call on to run the code inside of them. And much like variables, you can name them whatever you want. When calling on a function, it looks like this. Now that we have learned what we need to, let's get started. To start off, I'm going to quickly go over the things you see on your screen now, so you aren't confused later on. First, let's talk about the scene hierarchy. This is where you can select objects in your scene and edit the components on them and their variables to your liking. As you can see, if we select the main camera, it shows up with its components and editable values on the right of our screen. If you'd like to, you can play around with these values to see what they do. Now let's talk about the asset browser. Here you can edit every single file in your project as well as view them. Next, we have the console. This is where you can output messages for testing or get big errors you don't know how to solve. Finally, we have the scene and game view. This is where you do the making of your game, as well as when you are testing your game. Once you click the play button, it will switch to the game view so you can play it. Now let's put our player into the scene. To do that, what we're going to do is we're going to right click in our scene hierarchy, and we're going to create a 2D object, which is a square. Once you have done that, let's change the name to player. Now let's change the color of our square to a green to indicate that it's a player, and let's reset the transform component so it's in the middle of our scene. Now that we have our player, to get started with the movement, we're going to need two components. That is the rigid body, and we're going to also need a box collider 2D for when we want our cube to collide with other objects in the world in the future. We're going to set the gravity scale on the rigid body 2D component to 0, so our cube isn't constantly floating downwards, as if it's simulating gravity. We don't want this because we are not making a 2D platformer game. We're making a top-down game that is like Forager. Now that we have everything set up, we're ready to start coding our player movement. To do this, we're going to need a new script. So to add it, we're going to press add component. We're going to type in player in the search bar here, and then press new script and press create and add. Once you do that, it's going to appear in your asset browser, and we're going to create a scripts folder to hold all of our game scripts just to keep it a little bit more organized for now. Now we're ready to open our script and begin coding. So we have two functions here, one as update that is called every single frame, and start that is called at the beginning of the game or before the first frame update. To start off, let's add a few variables. We're going to have a public float, and let's call it move speed. And we're also going to have a rigid body 2D called rigid body. The reason why I named this a public float is because when you specify a variable as public, it allows you to edit it in the inspector that we talked about earlier. Now let's go to our start function, and we're going to set up our rigid body to be the rigid body that is on our player. To do this, we're going to do rigid body is equal to get component rigid body 2D. Now that we have this done, we can change our update function to fixed update. The reason we are changing from update to fixed update is because this involves physics, and when you are updating your objects or anything that has to do with physics, you usually want to do it in the fixed update function. Also note that we have private in front of our void fixed update. That is because it auto-generated. We don't necessarily need that, it's just a little extra, but if you have it like this, it basically means the exact same thing. So now let's add that vector2 we talked about earlier. We're going to have a vector2 variable called input. Now we're going to set it to a new vector2, and this might be a little bit confusing, but just follow along for now and I'll explain it. We're going to have input.getaxis raw horizontal. Make sure you spell it correctly with a capital H as well, because this is the default for Unity. And we're also going to put input.getaxis raw for our vertical axis. Alright, so to explain this, we are creating a new vector2 which takes in an x and y variable. If we press A, it's going to -1. If we press D, horizontal is going to be 1. So basically our x will be a value between -1 and 1. And the same thing goes for our vertical axis. Now let's put our input vector we just made into use. We're going to do rigid body dot velocity is equal to input times our move speed. And congratulations, if we go back to our scene, we should now be able to change our move speed value. We're going to set it as 5 for now. And now if you press play, let's see what happens. As you can see, now if you press WASD, your little cube player is moving. That's pretty much it for this video. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing, and if you'd like to support me a little bit extra, you can visit me over at patreon.com/codedetox. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.